Yes, Councilwoman Klapp.
On your slide on Valley comparison, that Mayor was talking about it too, you have a line on there that says most Valley cities require guest parking for multifamily projects. And I would like to, not this moment, but at some point even you can give it to me privately, I'd like to know more about what the other Valley cities do. Because if they're providing for parking for multifamily, guest parking, then how much is it? I mean, is there some number you can give me for city by city so we can kind of see how they're allowing for the guest parking? Because I think I believe that's one of the biggest issues is guest parking all over downtown. And so multifamily projects, I believe, should have some requirement. I don't know what that requirement should be, but some requirement for guests to be able to park and visit the tenants in the multifamily project. And that's also something that I think the hotels also should be providing. Some do, some don't. And so in those instances where there is a hotel that has no guest parking, and I can think of one that's real close to here that I went to a few months ago for a breakfast meeting, and I pulled up to the front, and they said, we don't have, because I said, where's your parking? He said, well, we don't have any. And he said, well, you got a parking garage? They said, yeah, you can pay for the whatever the 2, 3, or 4 hour rate was, and you can park in the parking garage, you can park on the street. So I drove around and found a parking place 2, 3 blocks away, and I kept thinking about that, and that, we're hearing that hotels are experiencing less requirement for cars in the garage because of Uber, so many of them probably have spaces in there that aren't being used. So why don't they provide if nothing else, a voucher when a guest pulls up and says, I want to go to your restaurant for breakfast, I'm meeting someone, that here, you can have a voucher and go in the parking garage for 2 hours in order to meet someone. I mean, I think there needs to be some flexibility here among the hotels. If they're asking for reduced parking requirements because of the Uber effect, then could they then, if in some cases existing hotels that are already here might have parking sitting there available that could be used for guest parking. And then, of course, for new hotels, I think there should be some guest parking requirements because people go and visit those hotels, and where are they going to park? So as we're building many hotels here in the area over the next few years, I think guest parking for both multifamily and hotels is something to look at. And then I noticed on the picture that you did of a couple pictures downtown where there was no parking at Main Street or wherever that was that Main Street? It's 1:45 in the afternoon. So if you're going to take a picture of parking needs, don't do it in the middle of the afternoon for a retail area because that's the time when nobody comes to retail. So my opinion is on Main Street or that area, take your pictures or look at the parking at 11:30 or 12 when people are going to lunch because that's restaurant time. And there are many restaurants that have plenty of parking until between 11:30 and 1:30. And then retailers, in my experience, see their customers come during lunch hour. So if they're not going to a restaurant, they're going to a retail location during lunch hour. And then it's dead for about 2-3 hours. And then around 5, they start coming out. They're getting off of work and they're going to the businesses. So 5 o'clock or later is then when the parking pressure is again on those businesses, not at 1:45 in the afternoon. And then I don't know when those pictures were taken in those parking garages. Was it taken at 2 o'clock in the afternoon or at 5 or noon or whatever? So I really do believe that there needs to be a better analysis of the parking situation at different times during the day and not just possibly at times when everybody agrees there are times when there are empty spaces and there are times when there are not. And I hear from a number of people who want to come downtown to go to their favorite restaurant for lunch, and they say, I cannot find a parking place for lunch. And so if we want to encourage restaurants to be downtown, then we got to consider that. There was another comment I wanted to make. You showed a lot of land, private land, space, small spaces, private land that have parking on them. But we know that the properties in downtown are being sold and resold these days for things, other development. And so we need to take in consideration that some of those private parking spaces are going to go away because whatever is going to replace them is probably going to not have as much parking available. And the reason I bring this up is that when restaurants, for example, contract for valet parking, they usually go to a private person and say, can I rent some of that land for my valet parking? Well, if that land goes away, then they have a problem in finding a place to put their valet parking. And I've heard this in several instances from restaurant owners in the downtown area, specifically some that are there along First Avenue and some in Main Street too, that, if they're using valet parking, they're very afraid of, as land gets sold off, their private parking agreements for valet are going to go away. And so this is a future problem, not necessarily today, but I think that's part of the reason why the business owners and merchants have talked about the future, is they're concerned about, as these properties get converted or renovated or redeveloped, that new uses come in that take away whatever available parking is there, or it might be a hotel that has no guest parking requirements, or it might be multifamily that doesn't have guest parking requirements, and that means that more and more of the parking places are going to be taken up by whatever that new development is. So with that, I would say that most all of the suggestions you make here in the end, I would agree with pursuing, with the exception of parking meters. I wouldn't do that. But other than that, I think everything else that you have on here about possibly modifying, you'd have to take a look at what that would be, and definitely increase the wayfinding. People do not know where parking spaces are. I looked at that Parker app that's been available, but it's not real user-friendly. So, it does tell you where parking lots are, but it's not very good. And, there's probably better apps today so that they know. But I know we have very strict signage requirements, but if there's some way to let people know that there's a parking area nearby, I would suspect most people don't even know those lots are down there by the museum. They have no idea that they could park there. And then strategic partnerships with the private sector, I think that's an excellent idea. I think having more time limitations in certain areas so that, that people don't take the parking for all day long is appropriate. But if we do that, then I know we have to have more monitoring. It does no good to have increased time limitations on parking and nobody checks it. And that's what I've heard from people, is that I watch it, that, they see that there's 2 or 3 hour parking in a certain place, but nobody ever drives by and checks it. So those people who work downtown are very savvy and know exactly where they can park in order to be able to keep their parking place all day long. And then data collection, I would encourage another parking study. 2015 was a long time ago, and lots have changed. Lots of new development in downtown, so I think a new parking study would be appropriate. I think this is really old data we're looking at from the last study. And we've already talked about needing more public parking. We just got to decide where it needs to go. But in the retail business, people will not walk very far to a store. If you have the parking too far from them, they will not go to your store. They'll go somewhere else where the parking is more available because there's too many choices. And so that's part of the critical nature of the merchants that are downtown, is they need to have the parking as close to them as possible in order to make sure that their customers will actually come to them and not drive around one time, give up, and go somewhere else. Thank you.